So my sister asked me last week why I still haven't gone camping again since that trip, and I laughed it off, changed the subject, made some joke about bugs. But the truth is I haven't told anyone the real reason. Not her, not my roommate, nobody. So I'm just going to say it here, and maybe that's easier than saying it to a person's face. It started because Danny's van broke down. That's it, that's the whole dramatic beginning. Four of us were supposed to drive up together, me, Danny, his girlfriend Priya, and Mason, who had met maybe 3 times before that weekend, always at parties, always for like 10 minutes before he got pulled into some other conversation. He worked with Danny at the bike shop. I knew he had a dog named Waffles and that he laughed too loud at his own jokes. That was basically my entire file on him. Danny's van died 40 minutes from the trailhead, and by the time the tow truck came and we all crammed into Priya's Corolla instead, we'd lost almost 3 hours. 3 hours doesn't sound like much until you're hiking into a canyon at 4 in the afternoon instead of 11 in the morning, racing a sky that already looked wrong. I remember Mason saying, "It's probably fine, it's just clouds," and I remember thinking, "Sir, that is not what clouds look like when they're fine." We got the tents up right as the first fat drops started hitting. Priya and Danny had their two-person tent. Mason and I had brought our own separate ones because obviously we barely knew each other, why would we share? I got mine half staked down when the wind just took it, like picked it up off the ground, poles and all, and folded it sideways into a bush 30 feet away. I stood there holding 2 tent stakes like an idiot. Mason yelled something I couldn't hear over the wind, and then he was just there, grabbing my arm, pulling me toward his tent, and I remember very clearly thinking, absolutely not, and also climbing in after him anyway because the alternative was getting hit by a flying branch. "This is temporary," I said, once we were both inside, soaked, breathing hard. "Extremely temporary," he agreed. Then a huge crack of thunder went off directly above us, and we both flinched at the exact same time, and it was so stupid that we ended up laughing, this nervous kind of laughing where you're not actually sure if you're scared or not. Danny and Priya were shouting something from their tent, muffled, probably, "Are you guys okay?" And Mason shouted back, "We're alive," and I remember thinking that was a weirdly specific thing to say. Alive, not fine, alive. The tent was a 2-person tent in the way that tents are technically rated for 2 people who don't have shoulders. We were sitting cross-legged, knees basically touching, both our sleeping bags still rolled up because there hadn't been time to set anything up properly. Rain was hammering the fly so hard it sounded like static, like a radio stuck between stations. "I lost a shoe," Mason said after a minute. "You lost a shoe?" "Somewhere between the car and here, I don't know where, I have one shoe." I looked down and yeah, he had one hiking boot and one sock, and the sock was already soaked through, and something about that, the fact that in the middle of an actual emergency his brain had clocked, "I have one shoe," as worth mentioning, it did something to me. Made him feel like a real person instead of just Danny's coworker with the dog. "You're gonna get a trench foot," I told him. "Is that a real thing, or are you just saying scary words at me?" "It's a real thing, World War I, Google it." "We don't have service." "Then you'll never know if I'm lying, will you?" He looked at me for a second too long, like he was deciding whether that was funny or weird, and then he laughed, and it was this surprised kind of laugh, like it caught him off guard. I want to be honest about something. I wasn't thinking about him like that yet, not in that first hour. I was cold and my socks were wet, and I was doing the math on whether the tent stakes on his tent were actually going to hold, because if that thing went the same way mine did, we had a real problem. I was thinking about survival stuff, practical stuff. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. Around what I'm guessing was 7, though neither of us had a working phone to check, the wind picked up so much that the tent walls were pressing in and out like the whole thing was breathing. Mason had his hand flat against the wall at one point just to feel it move. "Is this normal?" he said. "Like, is this a normal amount of tent movement?" "I don't camp enough to know what's normal." "Cool, cool, 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 good talk." We ended up unrolling both sleeping bags because it was getting cold enough that sitting there shivering stopped being an option. There wasn't really a way to do that without ending up shoulder to shoulder. I laid mine out first and he laid his right next to it, and neither of us said anything about it, we just did it, because the tent was small and that was the only configuration that made sense. At some point he offered me one of his gloves, just one. I have 2 hands and one glove works out to 50% efficiency either way, might as well split it. That math doesn't check out. It checks out emotionally. I took the glove. I think that's the moment I started actually looking at him instead of just being aware he existed nearby. Not in a dramatic way. Just, he had this thing where he'd start a sentence like he knew exactly where it was going and then get distracted halfway through and end up somewhere completely different, and somehow it always still landed. He told me a story about Waffles getting stuck under a porch that took 4 unrelated detours, and I still don't fully understand how the dog got under there. But I was laughing so hard at one point that Danny yelled through the storm asking what was so funny, and neither of us could actually explain it. Around what felt like 9, the thunder stopped being constant and started being occasional. These long gaps where it was just rain, just wind, and in one of those gaps Mason went quiet for a while and I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep sitting up. He hadn't. "Can I tell you something kind of embarrassing?" he said. "Depends how embarrassing. I almost didn't come this weekend." "Why not?" He picked at a loose thread on his sleeping bag for a second before he answered. "Danny kept saying you were cool and I should meet you properly instead of just like party small talk. And I don't know, I got weirdly nervous about it, which is a stupid thing to be nervous about, meeting your friend's friend, but I was. I didn't know what to do with that. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, more because I didn't have a real reaction ready. Why would you be nervous to meet me?" "I don't know, I liked what Danny said about you. I think I built you up in my head a little and then I panicked that you'd be nothing like that." "Was I nothing like that?" "No," he said, and he said it fast, like it came out before he could decide whether he wanted it to. "You were exactly like that, which honestly is worse because now I don't have an excuse." I didn't ask what he meant by that. I think some part of me already knew, and asking would have made it real too fast and I wasn't ready for reality yet. So I just sat with it. The rain kept going. Somewhere outside a branch came down hard enough that we both jumped, and he grabbed my knee without thinking and then let go just as fast, like his hand had done it on its own and his brain caught up a second late. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine. I just reflexes." "It's fine, Mason." I don't think I'd said his name out loud yet that whole trip. Something about saying it right then, quiet in that small space with the rain going, it landed differently than I meant it to. He looked at me and didn't say anything, and I looked back, and for a second neither of us moved, and it was the kind of silence that has weight to it, that you can feel pressing against your chest. Then he broke it by saying, "Your hands are freezing," which was true, and also clearly not what either of us had actually been thinking about. We ate cold granola bars for dinner because cooking wasn't happening in that wind. Priya's voice came through the rain at some point, muffled, asking if we wanted to switch up the sleeping situation, come cram into their tent instead. And Mason and I looked at each other and I said we're okay before I even really decided to say it, and he nodded like that was the right answer. And I remember feeling relieved and confused about being relieved at the same time. Somewhere around midnight, the storm dropped from a roar to something quieter, still raining, but the wind wasn't trying to kill us anymore. We were both lying down by then, sleeping bags side by side, staring up at a tent ceiling neither of us could actually see because it was pitch dark. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Go for it." "Earlier what you said, about not having an excuse anymore." He didn't answer right away. I heard him shift, heard the sleeping bag fabric move, and then his voice came out lower than before, like he'd decided to stop performing casually. "I meant that I liked you before I really knew you, and now that I know you a little, I like you more, and that's inconvenient because I don't actually know what you want or if you want anything. And I've been sitting here for like 6 hours trying to figure out if this is a thing or if I'm making it a thing." I didn't say anything for a second. My heart was doing something stupid and fast. "I don't know either," I said honestly. "I wasn't expecting tonight to feel like this." "Like what?" "Like this," I said because I genuinely didn't have better words for it. Warm somehow despite the cold. Awake somehow despite how tired I was. Like something was happening that I hadn't given myself permission to want, and now that it was happening I didn't want to stop it. He turned his head toward me. I could just barely make out the shape of him in the dark, more felt than seen. "I'm gonna do something and you can tell me if it's a bad idea," he said, and his voice actually shook a little on it, which somehow made it feel more real than if he'd said it smooth. "Okay," I said. He kissed me. It wasn't smooth or cinematic. It was a little off-center at first because neither of us could see anything, and his nose bumped mine and he laughed into it, this quiet nervous laugh, and adjusted, and then it wasn't clumsy anymore, it was just warm and slow and real. and I remember thinking in the middle of it that I could hear my own heartbeat over the rain, which felt impossible but also exactly right. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. I could feel him still close, breathing a little unsteady. "Was that?" he started. "Yeah," I said before he could even finish asking. "Yeah, it was fine, more than fine." "I've been wanting to do that since the shoe thing," he said, and I actually laughed out loud, this real laugh that surprised even me. "The shoe thing, that's the moment for you. You didn't make fun of me for it. Everyone makes fun of me for stuff like that. You just told me I'd get a trench foot and move on like it was a normal thing to say to someone you just met." "It is a normal thing to say." "It's really not, but I liked it." We lay there for a long time after that, not talking, just close, his hand eventually finding mine in the dark, and I remember thinking I should feel more freaked out than I did. I didn't. It felt like something that had been building quietly the whole day without either of us naming it, and now it had a name, or at least a shape. The storm passed sometime before sunrise. I know because I woke up to actual light coming through the tent fabric, this pale gray morning light, and Mason was still there, one shoe and one sock, hair a disaster, sleeping bag half kicked off, and I just laid there for a minute looking at him before he woke up, trying to figure out if last night was going to still be true in daylight, or if it was one of those things that only exists in the dark. He opened his eyes, looked at me, and didn't look away, and didn't look confused or regretful, just smiled, slow, a little shy. "Morning," he said. "Morning. So that happened. It happened. Are we normal about it or weird about it?" I thought about it for a second. I don't know if I can be normal about it. I think I'm a little wrecked, actually. He propped himself up on one elbow. "Wrecked good or wrecked bad?" "Wrecked good. I think I've been wrecked good since the trench foot comment. If I'm being honest, I just didn't clock it until you kissed me." He grinned at that, this big unguarded grin, and reached over and tucked a piece of hair off my forehead, which is such a small thing to describe, but it hit me harder than the kiss did somehow. Like the kiss was the storm and that was the quiet after it, and the quiet was the part that actually stuck. We didn't tell Danny and Priya right away. We climbed out of the tent that morning into a canyon that looked completely different than the night before. All the dust settled, everything smelling like wet stone and pine, and Danny took one look at us and said, "You guys look like you didn't sleep at all." And Mason said, "Rough night," and caught my eye, and I had to look away because I was smiling too much to keep a straight face. We told them on the drive back, actually. Priya's car, windows down, Mason's hand resting on my knee like it belonged there, and Danny nearly swerved off the road when he heard, not because he was upset, just shocked, going, "Wait, wait, since when?" And Mason just said, casual as anything, "Since I lost a shoe." And Danny had absolutely no idea what that meant, and neither did Priya, and Mason and I just looked at each other and laughed because it was ours, that joke, and it didn't need explaining to anyone else. It's been 8 months now. We still camp sometimes, though I bring a better tent stake system now and learned that lesson. Mason still only ever seems to have one shoe's worth of luck with him at all times, loses something new every trip, and I've stopped being surprised by it. I just kind of expect it now, the way you expect weather. I think about that night a lot, honestly. Not really the kiss, even though obviously the kiss was, yeah, the kiss was everything. But mostly I think about the quiet before it. Two people crammed into a tent too small for both of them, waiting out something loud and uncontrollable, not knowing yet that the storm was going to end up being the easy part. The hard part was just sitting there, close enough to feel each other breathing, both of us too scared to say the thing we were both already feeling. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Danny's van hadn't broken down. If we'd all had our own tents like planned, if the storm hadn't forced us into that one small space together. I don't know. Maybe it would have happened eventually anyway, slower, over months of party small talk and near misses. But I like that it happened the way it did. I like that it took a storm. I like that some things only show up when you run out of room to avoid them. Mason's outside right now, actually, loading the car for a weekend trip, and he just yelled in that he can't find his other hiking boot, and I didn't even look up from writing this. I just yelled back, "Check under the porch, that's where Waffles keeps everything," and he laughed so loud I could hear it through the wall. I don't know, maybe some people fall for each other slowly over years. We fell for each other over one night, one tent, one storm, and it's held for 8 months and counting, and honestly I think it's going to hold a lot longer than that.